The next step is to create the database, and we're going to use the command create database and the database name, but there are several parameters that we need for this. We need to set the primary file, so we use onPrimary to do that. And let's go ahead and get started with the first part, and then we'll add it as we go. So in here, we're going to put create database, and then the name that we're going to call it. And I'm going to call it student U. Now notice when I push enter, it doesn't execute. It doesn't execute till I push the arrow, so I can keep building the command. And then the next step is to set on primary. So I'm going to do on primary. And in here I'm going to be setting several things. I'm going to set the name. And again, the name is student U. And I'm going to set the file name. Now this one is long and it needs to include the entire path. So you want to make sure that you need to be able to go find it in your File Explorer. So if I go to my files and I look up on C drive, it's going to be in program files, and it really depends where you save this, so you might have to look around for it. But in program files, I've got Microsoft SQL Server, and inside there I have my instance, which is MSQL SQL Express 14.SQL Express, and inside there's a folder called MSSQL, and inside there is a folder called Data. And inside there is where the database files are. And you'll recognize these MDF files are associated with the system databases. So there's one MDF file for each of the system databases, and also one LDF file, which is the log file, and we'll be doing that too. So we need this whole address in there. So I can copy that and paste it here, and then I can put the name of the file, and I'm just going to call it studentu.mdf, and that's the extension for file names, for database file names. Okay, and then we need to also specify the size. So we're going to specify, and this is the size that it's going to start. So we'll go ahead and start it with 5120 kilobytes, which is the same as 5.12 megabytes. And we also want to say how it grows. So we can do file growth. And this says once you fill up the 520 kilobytes, how much do you want to add on? As soon as you get big enough, it adds on a certain amount. And we can just say, every time you get too big, just go ahead and add 124 kilobytes. Now these are really small sizes because this database is going to be small. If you have a larger database, you want to make these quite a bit bigger. All right, that's setting up the settings for the primary file structure. Now we want to set up the log file, and it has very similar information, but we'll change a couple of things. In fact, it's similar enough that I'm going to copy it. When you do this, you have to be really careful because sometimes you make mistakes, right? You don't forget to change something. So this one, this is not our primary. This is a log on. And the name now it can't be the same, so I'm just going to do studentu_log, and that will let us know that it's the log file. And the file name, the path is going to be exactly the same, but I'm going to change the name again to _log, and now I'm going to change the type too. Instead of MDF, it's going to be LDF. And the file size can be smaller, so I'm going to cut that down to 2048. And the file growth, instead of cutting kilobytes, another way you can do it is a percent. So increase it by 10% of however big it currently is. So that's just another way that you can do that. And that is actually the end of our, that's the end of our file. I mean, of our statement, of our query. So let's go ahead and try this. We're going to execute it. Cross your fingers, and it says it completed successfully. Now let's go look at a couple of things. One, we can go look, we have to refresh, so always you have to right click on your server and refresh, and then we can go into databases, and there we see it. There's student U. Remember that it wasn't there, and now it is. So the database has been added. If we look, it's expanding tables, and there's, okay, so we have maybe some system and other file savings, but we haven't added any tables yet, so none are showing up in here directly. And if we go back here where we were looking at data, notice that our student U MDF file and our student U _log file exist. So they were created. The folder has to already exist before you do the command, but not the files. It will create the files in the location specified. Now we've got a pretty long command here, so we want to save this again in our plain text editor. And the next part of this step, this is still part of creating a database, is we need to add Go to complete the database creation before continuing. And this actually, when we do it in here, we push the execute button, but when we're storing it in our plain text editor, if a command needs to be executed before we can do the next command, we actually need to type the Go, so that at some point we're going to be able to copy all of these into Management Studio and run them all one after another. And this is one of the places where we need to put Go, because we're going to use this database and we need it to be executed. It won't execute automatically until it hits this Go. So we want to be sure and say Go and create that before we move on to using that database.